Welcome, FinTech Talkers, to another edition of the FinTech Talk Show. I'm your host, Patty. My guest today is Chandini Jain, CEO of Auquan, an agentic AI platform for financial institutions turning vast amounts of unstructured data into instant structured insights for use in risk monitoring, investment credit analysis, screening and due diligence, sustainability, and compliance. Welcome, Chandni, to the FinTech Talk Show.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Great. So before we get into Auquan and what you're building there, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to building AI agents in financial services? Also, if you can talk a little bit about your passions outside work.
Yeah, of course. So my personal background, I grew up in India, went to IIT Kanpur. Then I ended up at Deutsche Bank. That was my first job out of college. Did that for a year and a half, hated finance, ironically, decided I wanted to stick with like code engineering and math was my passion, moved to the US for a master's degree. And then after that, I ended up working at a company called Optiver in Chicago. The only reason I actually even interviewed with them, because I was kind of like done with finance, is they have a very interesting interview process. The first step is a math test. You have 8 minutes, 80 questions, and the cutoff is 70 plus to qualify. So I was kind of on an ego trip. I'm good at math. Let's take this test. Let's see how I do. When I qualified the test, they told me that if I interviewed with them, they could pay for my trip to Chicago. And I was a poor grad student with no money. It's like, oh, free trip to Chicago sounds great. Let's go do this interview. And that was the only reason why I went originally. But when I went there, I had a fabulous time with the people that I met. They were all like me. They didn't seem like finance people. They all seemed very quantity math people. I ended up chatting with one of the person who eventually became my colleague, and we spent way more time talking about the Monty Hall problem than the actual interview. So like, okay, these are my kind of people. I can see myself having a great time with them. I like their approach to, I like what they're thinking about in terms of making investment decisions, and just seems like, the kind of people you want to come in and the kind of discussions you want to have every day. So I ended up working at Optiver, first in Chicago, then in Amsterdam. In Chicago, I was working on their global art trading strategy desk. We built that out. And then I moved to Amsterdam to do the same thing, but on a global scale. And that's kind of when I was like, okay, let's try the startup thing out. I want to build something of my own. I want to see what it's like to run a company. Also, as we were building out the desk in Amsterdam, we were basically big consumers of data. If we wanted to buy any data set, we had budget, no questions asked. What we didn't have was a lot of tooling to look through that data. So we ended up building some like basic rudimentary tools to help us look through information much faster, much more cost effectively than we were doing before. So it felt like there's probably a problem there to solve. So that the combination of those two led me to quit my job and start Auquan. Early days, we were basically just building the tools that I wished I had when I was running my desk. But over the last few years, as we've been running this business, the company's evolved quite significantly into what we do today. And along the way, like learned lots of things about thinking about your customer, thinking about go-to-market, thinking about the ROI for the end customer, thinking about procurement, and eventually landed on the problem that we solve today, which is AI agents for finance. The idea even comes from the fact that as we started working closely with our end customers, we started to realize the challenge was not tooling to look through data better. The challenge was it doesn't matter where in finance. If you talk to private equity, you talk to asset managers, you talk to banks, there is so much work today that is still done manually, which is very repetitive, right? It's basically process. So you have very talented, very smart, very well compensated people spending so much of their time just reading messy PDFs and reading presentations and looking through Excels to create another Excel or another PDF or another PowerPoint, like basically create an investment memo or create an Excel model. And that structured document that they create, that is usually the starting point for interesting decision making. That is really where people want to be spending their time on. But in the absence of any kind of technology or tooling, people end up spending so much of their time just battling data, finding information, running multiple control Fs, and creating these structured documents. So that's where the whole idea of an agent that can complete an end-to-end task for you comes from. The main premise of the company is, look, all of these people, they're so talented, they're made to outperform, they're not made to grind. So let us do the grind for you. Let Auquan's AI agents do the grind for you, and let those people focus on work that you've actually hired them to do and that they're actually good at and that they actually enjoy.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Lot to unpack there, Chandni. Going back to your background with IIT, math, maybe I want to touch on that before we jump on to what you're building around the tooling, which is very fascinating. I've a lot of questions on that. So how was it? I went to IIT as well, a different one, KGP or Kharagpur, and you went to Kanpur. And I think all IITians kind of share that kind of memories, I guess, of such a good time. So talk a little bit about that and your love for math. Where did that come from? Were you always like that, like kind of in high school, or did you develop it later in life?
No, I've always been a math person, like growing up. My parents are both doctors, and I think they knew, like, when I was 8 years old, that I did not have a medical career ahead of me. My thing, like, lay in math. And I was one of those people, like, I'm just giving myself away as a nerd right now, but I was one of those people where in summer break I finished the entire math syllabus book for the year because it was fun and exciting. So it's very clear to me that I want to do something related to math. And then obviously, in India, the options are, if you're really good at academics, that you become an engineer or you become a doctor. And then engineering is the one that allowed me to like pursue math, which is why I ended up giving JEE, going to Kanpur. I didn't study math at Kanpur. I studied mechanical engineering. You know how the course
Yeah,
selection
yeah.
works. But I think the best part about doing a master's in the US was the education system is quite flexible. It doesn't mandate what courses you do. So even though my master's was also in mechanical engineering, everything that I did was, I was basically in the maths department the entire time. I did not spend any time in the mechanical engineering department. So I think, yeah, for me, it was pretty clear. Whatever I do needs to have some like math component to it. Kanpur, IIT Kanpur was amazing. I like everyone, like you, I had a great time. It's for the first time in your life, you feel like you're surrounded by people. Everyone is like you, everyone thinks like you, one can operate on this, like the same kind of mental cycles as you, everyone has the same mental model of the world as you. Um, so that was pretty amazing. I think like 4 years in Kanpur, cannot fault them, had a great time.
That's great. That's great. Thanks for sharing. So jumping into the tooling, you described it very well. There's a lot of data floating around and people kind of synthesize it or create a structure and then all the decision comes out of it. And you're building kind of agent or putting AI to work there. But before we kind of get into the specifics of that, if I can kind of get you to step back, right? And kind of get your perspective on how AI, especially generative AI or agentic architecture for that matter, will kind of shift the architecture in banking and financial services. So, how I mean by that is today you have systems of record for different things, loans and core banking, and so on and so forth. And then you have systems of engagements, which is digital and all the other channel applications, if you will. And then obviously you have data that's generated and the data, unstructured data in terms of documents and other things that are lying around. So that's the state, and there's a lot of technology that's been put in to streamline things. AI obviously is fundamentally a disruptor. The like domain specific models that sit on top of these, or LLMs that are trained on some of these, and of course agents built on top. Draw that out, Chandani. How do you think banks and financial services, kind of their architectures and their applications will evolve, given what's happening in AI?
Yeah. So you said systems of record. That's one fundamental piece. There is systems of engagement. I think what AI adds is a system of action, is how I think about it. So far, the way we evolved architecture is, we had data and then we needed a centralized place, a source of truth of the data, and we created systems of record. Then we needed a way for people to be able to interact with that data. So we created systems of engagement. The problem with, or not the problem, but like the design of systems of engagement is it requires a human to engage, right? So we have a database, you have CRUD apps, and then you have a front end. And that front end is where you have drop downs and clicks and buttons and form fields where you can either you interact with that database. And that's what the world has looked like so far. But if you then start to think about why you're doing that, you're basically trying to achieve an outcome, right? There's something maybe you're searching for information, but you're searching for information because you want to create a document. Maybe you're trying to filter and drop down and copy paste information, but that is because maybe you're trying to prepare for a client meeting. So you're interacting with data to achieve an outcome. And today, that interaction with data to achieve an outcome, that action lies on the person. And that is what AI is now starting to capture. So you will still need systems of record, of course. That data is super valuable. But the way interaction happens with that data is going to change quite significantly, where you will not need a person interacting with the data. You will have systems of action or agents interacting with the data, completing end-to-end tasks, generating the outcome that the person would have otherwise generated. And really, you only bring people in where you actually require human creativity, right? Otherwise, I have an example. We work with LPs and we work with GPs, right? GPs look through portfolio company data, which comes to them in like PDFs and PowerPoints and Excel files. Then they do a lot of like manual work on them. Then they create a reporting for their LPs, which is another PDF. Then that reporting goes to the LPs. Then the LPs look through that PDF and they get similar PDF from all of the GPs that they're working in, and then they create like a valuation for their entire portfolio, right? If you just think about how much inefficiency there is in that process, it's insane, right? The world, as I see it in the future, is all of the portfolio companies will upload their data into one standard system of record. You will have an agent that will sit on top of that system of record that will collate the data across all of the portfolio companies, that will create standard reporting. There is no PDF that sits in between. That agent then speaks to an agent on the LP side, just hands the data packet from the GP side to the LP side. The agent on the LP side is collecting data packets from all of the GPs, harmonizes all of that data, and stores it back on a system of record that sits on the LP side that contains valuations of all of the underlying GPs. And that's it. And that's sort of how I see the architecture evolving.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And what Chandni was explaining is limited partners and general partners in the venture capital world, and they're kind of seeing off of the same information but a different view. And well, that's a great example to kind of explain almost what you're referring to as disintermediation of kind of the information flow, right? And it's action oriented or purpose oriented, and that's great. So now you're building the tooling or building the agent to do this. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think just for definitional purposes, first, like what is even an agent and how it differs from other things, or how it differs from standard automation. If you think about automation is like lots of if-else statements, right? If this, then this, if this, then this, if this, then this, where you have very, very, very structured flow of work, and you can pretty much codify it into if-else statements. You can automate that. And that is what traditional RPA has done, right? Then you have workflows where LLMs come in, where you have maybe like fuzzy boundaries of work, right? But it is still largely if-else statements. So an example of that would be, if you could say that every time open a folder that has this name, in that folder, there will be a file that will have this name. On that file, on page number 5, there will be a table. And in that table, second column, third row, you will always find a value. You can RPA it because it is very structured, right? And you follow like a set path of work that needs to be done. The second part comes when the work that needs to be done is fairly standard, but you're saying in one of these folders, in one of the files, on one of the pages, there is a value that could be called by EBITDA, that could be called by some other name. Find that value. That is when you need an LLM, because the boundaries around the work are kind of fuzzy. And that's what LLMs by themselves are great at. They don't need the document structure to be able to find information. Then there is a third level of automation where you can't write if-else statements, right? You can say, this is the outcome that I want to achieve. This is your input stream of information to achieve that outcome. Figure out how to get to the outcome from the income stream, from the input data stream, right? So that could mean that you go into that input data stream, again, could be these folders. That could mean that you go into these folders and you open certain files and you try and search for that certain information. But if you don't find that information, then maybe the next thing you do is actually pull data from a specific data vendor and see if that information exists there. And if that doesn't happen, then maybe it means you actually go and run a search on publicly available data. And if you cannot find information anywhere, then you report back and say information does not exist, right? And that is one of the possible paths that you can take. But all you say is I want to achieve this desired output from this input data that is available to me. The path in between is not set. It can change depending, it requires some kind of discretion, it requires some kind of decisioning in between to say, should I do this or should I do this or should I do this or should I do something completely different? If I think about the automation spectrum, that is sort of, this is RPA, the early bit where it's like literally if-else structured statements, and the last part is agents, where it's not just the data that is fuzzy, but the next steps that need to be taken are also fuzzy and can depend based on the input data stream that is available to you or the output that you want to generate. So that's what we think of as agents. If that is an agent has two characteristics, right? One, it really needs to focus on an outcome. It needs to complete a task and focus on an outcome. And two, it needs to have enough underlying knowledge, training, domain-specific knowledge to know what are the possible things that it could potentially do to achieve that outcome. And that's what Auquan focuses on. Which is also, we can go into another tangent, but which is where I think the domain specificity of an agent or vertical focus of an agent becomes super important, right? So the way we work with our customers is customers will tell us what is the outcome that they want generated and what is the input data that would be available to an agent. So an example could be, they would say, I want to generate a 5-page deal screen, and the input data that is available is the company SIM that comes from a company, and any information that the banker who's originating the deal has sent. And then on top of that, I also have data streams available from Frequent, PitchBook, Crunchbase, and news, for example. That's all, right? From that, we feed that to the platform where we let a super agent then break the output task down to say, okay, to be able to generate an investment memo that basically looks like this, that has these 10 different sections, what is the work that I need to do? Okay, I need to work on 10 different sections. Under each section, these are the subsections that I need to work. The first section might be business overview. The second section could be company management. The third section could be company revenue. The fourth section could be something else. Then it might say, okay, under company management, I need to figure out who the entire C-suite of the company. I need to look at their past work experience, and I need to run a public data search to make sure they have no criminal backgrounds. Cool. Now let me go and actually search in the underlying data, find the name of the C-suite. Now let me run a search with each of the names of C-suite and publicly available data to see if they have criminal records. Now that I have all of this information, let me collate it back into this nicely formatted chart that this customer wants to tell them what the company management is, and do it step by step for each of the sections until I have the entire investment memo. And then produce it as an output. And all of this orchestration happens automatically. The system decides what is the work that it needs to do to deliver that output given the input data. And then obviously there is a human in the loop layer, which verifies the work of an agent. Sometimes because agents are still quite new and they're still undergoing training, you might need to orient the agent correctly. So you might need to make some changes like don't pull credit rating from the internet, pull credit rating from Moody's, or do not pull financials from the internet, pull financials from CapIQ. But again, once you incorporate that learning in the agent, the next time it tries to orchestrate a task on its own, it's just going to do a better job.
Yeah. No, wonderful. And a lot to unpack there. I love your kind of the framework around automation or maturity agent being the highest level, starting at RPA. So in many ways, agents are like RPA on steroids, except that they're autonomous and they problem solve and they're task oriented, as you said. A lot of how you described how you do that investment memo necessitates kind of a good access for the agent or that piece of code of the entire data.
Yep.
And kind of the meta aspect of the data as to the agent knows what this data about. So can you talk a little bit about that in terms of when you build the tooling, obviously you go down and understand some of this data and model it in or read it in. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. And just taking a step back, you said access, it requires a lot of access to the data for the agent. There is actually something more fundamental there, right? I believe that for an agent to actually be useful, it needs to map to the user's theory of mind as closely as possible.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is, for a user, the task that is done by the agent or the output produced by the agent needs to look as close as possible to if they had done the work themselves. think of an agent like an employee, right? If you have an employee and they produce a memo for you and you're like, this is the memo that I would have written, they're a great employee. If they produce a memo where you're like, man, this work is like so shit, I need to go and do like half of this again myself, that's not a great employee. And that's kind of how we think about agents as well. Now, what will make an agent produce an output that is as close as possible to how a human would have done the work? One, they need to see all of the data that the person would see, which comes to your point of data access. So if a person has access to previous firm knowledge, you need to give the agent access to that. If a person has access to data streams from multiple different vendors that the firm is buying information from, you need to give the agent access to that. If the person would have access to multiple password protected files and the password, you need to give agent the access to that. So all of that needs to be factored in when you're thinking about the agent design in terms of input data access. The second thing is the agent reasoning like a person would have reasoned, to your point of like agents can problem solve, agents are autonomous, but they need to problem solve like a person would have problem solved, which is where the domain specificity of an agent becomes important. You don't want an agent to problem solve like a consultant. When you're talking to a private equity firm, you need it to problem solve like a private equity associate, right? So you need to build that understanding into the agent. And the third part is it needs to also, this is super important. Like, we talk a lot about agent design. We don't talk about agent interfaces. It needs to output in an interface where the person works, right? So if you say today our workflow is, I get access to some company's data, I drag it into a Teams chat and I tell my associate to send me a PowerPoint. It needs to feel like that. So it needs to be able to send you a PowerPoint. It needs to send you a PowerPoint that looks exactly like your firm's PowerPoint, and it needs to send it to you in your Teams chat. And if you incorporate all those three, then you have an agent that maps as closely to the user's theory of mind, as I call it. Now, when we then build agents at Auquan, we take care of each of those at the implementation stage. The data access, we connect to a firm's internal data. We can pull data. We have connectors built into lots of finance-specific data vendors. If firm has some like esoteric data vendor that we've never worked with, as long as they have the right data access to distribute the content, we will connect to that data vendor. We come connected to over 2 million sources of publicly available data, which could be relevant for finance. So we take care of that at the implementation stage. Similarly, with the output interfaces, we work with the customer to say, what is the experience you want your users to have? Do you want a web-based experience? Do you want an email bot-based experience? Do you want a chat-based experience? Do you want a combination of those two? And we define that experience for the customers as well.
No, that's great. And there's a lot of noise, to be honest, around agentic and agents and how they are the best things in sliced bread. And you're obviously getting deep into it. You're talking about agent design, how to build the optimal agent and the characteristics that you would use in design. So it's fabulous. Kind of touch on that second point, right? So you want it to do what, say, the private equity or whatever the role is specific, right? And kind of have human-like or the best human-like capabilities. So how do you incorporate that? How do you study that, and how do you incorporate that into your agent design and implementation?
Yeah, and that's where training becomes important, and then the human in the loop becomes very important. Training in the sense, when we design an agent for a workflow, we need examples of what good looks like to tell the agent this is how a person would have worked. We also need examples of like, what is it that the person would have done to achieve that outcome. One of the things with LLMs today is they are trained on outputs. They're not trained on the steps that were taken to achieve that output, right? So I can feed my agent an investment memo, but it doesn't know what it is that the analyst did to actually produce that memo, right? So we actually ask for both examples of what good looks like, so the agent knows what a good outcome is, but also like the checklist or the task list that someone would have done. And when I say we ask for the task list, it's more like the agent comes up with a task list and then we edit or update, or we work in conjunction with the customers to update the agent's task list of what it needs to do, with the idea that agent is learning. So next time it's better, and the next time it's better. And then once you've done it for like across 5 companies, it really understands quite well what it needs to do. So that's a part of it. And then there's continuous feedback cycles with the agent. So we allow the ability for customers to edit outputs. We allow them to ask follow-up questions. And if you see a particular follow-up question being asked again and again and again, the agent has missed the mark on that. So that goes back as feedback to the agent to say, incorporate this in your reasoning as well. But yeah, those two are like, and both of those are necessary. One is necessary to like for agent setup, and the second is necessary to make sure the agent is continuously learning and improving.
So sort of like reinforcement learning in some ways,
Yeah,
but at the agentic level,
at
not
least
so much
level.
at the model level. No, that's great. That's great, Chandni. Kind of switching gears a little bit, and I asked you kind of more of a broad-based stepping back question earlier, along the same lines. What you're describing is in some draconian sense a threat to all knowledge workers or knowledge economy. So I want to kind of get your perspective on how do you see that evolving? Would we have agents for sort of all knowledge personas, so to speak, right? You're building for financial analyst or back office in the financial services, but they could be, and you've had some background in derivative trading. Will we see agents doing derivative pricing in the future, and other things? I mean, obviously, the sky's the limit. So where do you see that going? How does that shift the knowledge economy?
Yeah. I honestly, I don't think agents are a threat to knowledge workers. I would think of agents as like, let me ask you honestly, can you not look at your day to day and look at parts of work where you're just like, man, I really just hate doing this work, right? I wish someone could take it off my plate. That work is not interesting. It's not exciting. No one wants to do it. That was one of the things that why we even like went down this path of like complete end-to-end tasks. Learnings, I think, from building previous iterations of this business and from my own life is automate the stuff that no one wants to do. Don't automate the fun stuff. That's kind of why you have a job, right? So if you're a private equity associate, you come into work because you want to work on a deal. You come into work because you want to talk to a company, you want to figure out what the company is building, you want to go research research that space, research that market, and you want to talk to the founders. All of that is exciting. Getting management data from like 500 portfolio companies and then being like, okay, this person reported in Excel, this person reported in a PDF, and they had no one's called anything the same. And you know what? Here they put like Q1 and Q2, and then they put like an LTM column in between. That's not fun, right? So the way we look at it is not it's a threat to knowledge workers. We look at it as it's a way of expanding the scale of human productivity. You're taking work off that people don't want to do, they don't enjoy, and honestly don't are not needed for. If you take that work off people's plate, you can focus people on things that are actually exciting, that are actually interesting, and you actually need people for. It's almost in my mind, it's a shift at the scale of industrial revolution, right? Before industrial revolution, we weaved clothes by hand, and that doesn't mean we've stopped weaving clothes by hand now. Hand woven clothes are just way more valuable now because people who continue to weave clothes by hand are just like the best weavers. But for everything else, we have machines making clothes, and that also doesn't mean that we're just producing way more clothes. We're consuming more as humans, right? So it's that idea of like you've expanded the scale of productivity through the industrial revolution by letting machines do things that we were previously doing by hand that honestly machines are just much faster at, right? I think of agents as something similar. You expand the scale of human production, you just expand overall productivity by letting agents do things that they will be much faster than people at, and frankly people don't enjoy doing.
Yeah, that's the best case I've heard for AI, Chandni. And I think you've said this before because I was kind of researching some of your work, kind of making work not only just productivity increase, but making work more inspiring, impactful, and fun for everyone. There's a lot of kind of routine work that we all do every day, and if we had AI co-pilots and AI agents to do some of them, we'll not only be productive, but we'll be happy and we'll get more time to play pickleball or other things or do more math. So-
Yeah, exactly. And that's really how I personally, that's my view of the future is AI is not it's not a threat, right? It's not to take away the fun stuff. It's to, like, coming back to my example of a private equity associate. It's like 8 p.m. and you want to go and have a beer with your friends, right? And you're like, I have to write 20 pages right now. Now, if you could just drag something, press a button, and those 20 pages get written for you in the next 5 minutes, you're having beer with your friends at 8:30. That's what you want in life, right? So that's how I think about the value of AI, making work fun, making work meaningful, taking the routine out of your work. I think that there's a line that we started using, which is like, minds are made to perform, not grind. Let us tackle the grind.
That's great. That's great. I love it. Minds are made to perform and not grind. I love it. In terms of, I think you alluded to a couple of use cases, but for our audience, what are some of the big hitters that you're seeing in what you're building in terms of applicability? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. I think at a very, very high level, wherever there is work that people are doing, takes a lot of time and requires you to look through very large amounts of data and is fairly repeatable in process are the ideal use cases for agents. In terms of where we are finding the most success today, it's basically in private markets and alternatives in investment banking, and for use cases like running very quick borrower screens, creating credit profiles of businesses. Like, okay, if you take that specific use case, right, credit profiles of businesses, if you look at how quickly and how much private credit has blown up in the last few years, it used to be like a 200-300 billion asset class like 3 years back. Now it's over 2 trillion, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing, right? So there's a lot more demand for private credit. Firms have raised huge amounts of money. Like a lot of firms have doubled and tripled AUMs in credit. They obviously haven't staffed their teams that quickly. Like you cannot spin up credit analysts and staff them that quickly, which means now these credit analysts are running at like 2x, 3x, are working at 2x, 3x capacity to get through their deal flow. That is really the kind of use case where AI is super powerful to say, do you really want your analyst to be working till like 4 a.m., spending time screening deals and generating credit profiles of businesses? If you could have AI just screen the ones that are useless out very quickly, and your analyst then spends time on the deals that are actually meaningful. So that is actually one of our hard-hitting use cases, generating credit profiles for businesses, for commercial banks, running top-of-funnel deal screens for private credit. The other one is running risk, compliance, and regulation checks. Compliance and regulation is largely code, right? It is process. You need to follow that process, but there are some idiosyncratic needs that every company or fund or bank might have based on either their internal protocols or maybe the geography that they operate in, or the LP base that they raise money from. And because of that, you end up building like large teams of people to do that work. People don't want to do that work. No one says it is, you know what is the best part of my day when I go and I read those documents to identify if this company is on a sanction list. That is those kinds of tasks are ideal for agents. So running risk compliance, sustainability, regulation checks, very popular use case. Responding to RFPs and DDQs from investors, very popular use case. You're basically, let's say you're a fund, if you have 1,000 LPs, you at least get 1,000 RFPs every year and probably some more. Every LP is asking you the same question. They're just asking it in like 1,000 different ways. So again, some poor IR person has to respond to the same question over and over and over again and write like 1,000 responses where they're basically just taking the same underlying information, but just responding to it differently. Again, very popular agent use case. That's kind of what I was saying earlier. Eventually, we won't even have someone responding to an RFP. There'll be an agent who will prepare a data packet that will just send it back to the LP agent. Yeah, so that's a very popular use case. Running portfolio reviews, running fund valuations for secondaries. Lots of like, if you look at like the finance mid office, it's basically process. It's just the reason you've needed people to do that work is because the underlying data is quite messy and unstructured, but it's largely like taking messy and structured data and converting it into structured documents and structured outputs. So lots of mid office use cases are quite popular.
Yeah, no. So private credit, risk and compliance, kind of investment placement. So in terms of your client base, they are large kind of capital markets or banks with capital markets office, or even private equity and private credit providers. Is that, and it seems like it's a diverse set of clientele you have.
Yeah, basically capital markets, capital allocators, capital, large LPs. So like some of our largest customers, I can't name everyone, a few are on our website, but like MetLife is a customer, UBS is a customer, Capital is a customer. Yeah.
Gotcha. And venture capital, you mentioned earlier in that the LPGP, you're working with some VCs as well?
No, so we don't do VC yet. When I said LP, it's mostly on the private equity side. I think the earliest that we come in is growth. Venture is mostly still raising on vibes, right? You need to talk to company management, and you need to figure out how much you believe in the person, the story, and those are the kinds of things that you need humans for. But when a company actually starts to have a lot of data when you're making investment decisions, that's kind of where we come in.
True. VC is a little bit more subjective. No, good point. In terms of where you are on your journey, do you want to share where you are, meaning both fundraising? Looks like you have a lot of customers, a lot of big customers. What are some of your next milestones, perhaps, and who you're looking to connect with? I have a kind of a broad audience, mostly US, but some overseas as well, Middle East and Asia and so on. Mostly bankers, innovators, banking innovators, startups, VCs and stuff. But who are you specifically looking to connect with?
Yeah. Honestly, anyone in financial services, if you're at an investment bank, or if you're at a private equity fund, or if you're at an asset manager, or if you're an insurance firm, and you look around you and you see your day or your working week, or you see your colleagues working week, and you're like, why are we doing this work manually? Please come talk to us. We guarantee we can make your work life way better, way more fun. We can make sure you're going home much earlier than you're doing today. So yeah, I think anyone who's in those departments, if you're the chief innovation officer, the chief technology officer, if you're just thinking about if you're AI curious and you're trying to think about how to bring AI into your organization, we're happy to chat. Done this across 20 plus private equity firms now, help with AI deployments. Yeah, and I think in terms of financing, we raised a seed round a couple of years back. We did a top up on our seed last year. We'll probably be opening Series A round relatively soon.
Cool.
We had a fabulous 2024. We went from like all of the things that I'm talking about, it's quite obvious that most of them have been possible in the last year as the underlying technology has leapfrogged, and which means the ROI that we can deliver to our customers has changed quite significantly. So we 4x revenue last year. We added close to 20 new customers, all of those, like I said, some of the largest financial organizations there. So can't complain. I've had a good year.
That's great. That's great. Congratulations. And if you're looking for any leads or candidate leads for your Series A, do let me know, and I can definitely do some
always looking for great people. I cannot work with incompetent people, and I love it when you have someone who's amazing. They just make magic happen in the company. So if you have anyone across engineering, across sales, across product, we're hiring across all roles, growing very quickly. Please send them my way.
Sure. And also I was saying, if you need a lead for your Series A, when you're ready for it, or maybe you have existing investors who want to lead, but definitely that's something I can do introductions to as well. But I'll keep the resources in mind as well. We could go on and chat a little bit more about AI and what you're building, Chandni, but we're kind of restricted on time. So like to in wrap up or in closing, we talked about your future and your company's future and what you're targeting. Maybe stepping back and talk about AI broadly. What are your predictions? I know I had a recent recording, and give you some context. We talked about DeepSeek and kind of the rise of the emerging markets, China, and that kind of stuff. And infrastructure versus and NVIDIA competition. So there's a lot of streams in AI, right? Not just at the application and agent level, which is what we kind of focused on today, but there's infrastructure, there's innovations in energy and that kind of stuff. So if I ask you to step, and you can talk in whatever context you want to, but how do you project AI out the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, like you said, there is a lot of there's a lot to unpack, as you would say, in that question, because across the stack, right, starting from like the infrastructure, the data center, the model layer, the AI infrastructure layer, the application layer, I think everything is growing so fast. Like honestly, can you believe that it's only the 7th of March this year? It already feels like this. So much has happened this year in AI. It feels like it's like half to almost a year's worth of innovation. So the space is changing so rapidly. I think I'm the most qualified, obviously, to speak about the application layer. And even the evolution there is super interesting, right? Like the stuff that we were doing, or a lot of people in my space were doing, we would call that like a GPT wrapper last year. This year, you're like, oh, that's actually quite interesting. We can see why you need those GPT wrappers, because they build so much domain specificity in it. The underlying models have improved so significantly compared to now. If you remember ChatGPT in like 2022 and how much it used to hallucinate and didn't even have references and so on. The way I think about it is the models will continue to improve. They will also continue to become cheaper and cheaper. That layer is almost going to become commoditized, and it's a race to zero. I have a belief where like OpenAI, Anthropic, these are all going to become API companies. For them, the biggest source of revenue is who is calling that model by an API and who's running queries on that model, right? So that's basically going to become that business model. And then the question in the application layer is, if the models become 100x cheaper and 100x better, where is the business value? Like how much build out is still needed on top of the model to deliver value to the end customer? And that is kind of what is interesting in the application layer. And that's how we think about it in the company and where our roadmap goes. But if I just talk about where the application layer is going in 2 to 5 years, I think there is so much around us today that we do that is going to be done by an agent, right? I mean, in my personal life, I was talking to a friend about this, and I see a world where I actually had this moment, so I was thinking about it. I would just say my internet's not working. Fix my internet. That's it. I would just state we're going to turn into an intent-based world. We will just state our intent, what we want happen, want to happen, and then my personal agent will wake up. It will try and figure out, why is my internet not working? Is it my internet's down, or is it because I have a bad router, or do I need something else? Maybe it's like, okay, actually there's a problem with your router. It's going to contact an agent on my internet provider side and say we need a new router. The agent on my internet provider side will send its scheduling to say when a technician can come with the new router. And another agent on my side is going to check my schedule. Those two agents are going to communicate, and something's just going to show up in my calendar saying a technician will come home and install a new router. And that's it. And that all would have happened because I stated the intent that my internet's not working and I want it fixed. And I think that's where the application layer is moving, where we're going to move away from how we interact with systems around us today to where as humans we just state intent and the world around us will just make it happen.
Yeah, and add humanoids and autonomous cars and drones, then it gets more complicated just in software.
Or more interesting, depending on who you ask. For me, that's like,
Yeah. No, but thanks for explaining. Sorry,
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, if you think about the world that we live in even today, like 10 years prior, that would have been science fiction, right? And a lot of that just more and more starts to seem possible. Like it's just a matter of like 6 months or a year where we're going to get there. So
that's right. And I want to just kind of talk about one point that you made, right? What would be the differentiation where models get smarter, they get reasoning, and they might have kind of executive kind of functioning capability and that kind of stuff. So what is the top of the agent? Meaning I use an analogy in kind of comparing this to OSs and apps, or even like the mobile OSs, to make it simpler rather than the server OS. So iOS and the App Store, right? And the non-Apple applications, what are the value add? Obviously, Apple built a lot of goods into the phones. So similarly, the iOS is kind of like the models, and the App Store or the apps, the external apps are agents that are other people building. Maybe it'll be an evolution like that. Maybe it won't, right? Maybe the iOS itself will be very competitive, but you made the point that they'll all be API companies, or they'll all be kind of OS companies, or the more agents that are tied to a model or to an LLM or to a foundational model, the better their economics will be, so to speak, and that will be their differentiation. So I like that point. So I just wanted to emphasize that. So that's a great point. Yeah. Thank you, Chandni, for how can people reach you? What social media is it? LinkedIn, X, or where should people find you? And you want to get out your website as well, please.
LinkedIn or X is I'm in both. For both, it's super easy. It's Chandini Jain, my first name, my last name. And our website is auquan.com.
Okay. And that's AUUAN.com. Okay. Thank you, Chandni, for being on the FinTech Talk Show.
Thank you for having me.